Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm McKenna. I'm the owner of Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. And I am excited to be back tonight with our friends at Agora and Polis Books. We've been doing a series with them for some time. And we are doing our April Agora and Polis night tonight, which will be moderated by the editor at Agora, Chantelle Osmond. I'll bring her on in a little bit, but as usual, if you have questions, don't be shy. You can put those in the live chat on YouTube or in the comments here on Facebook. And then I also have dropped a link in the comments for more information about the books, more information about the authors, and if you're inclined to order them. We always appreciate that. Thanks to our regular watchers out there for being there tonight. We will get to your questions in a little bit, but let me go ahead and get the authors started. So we're going to start with Caroline tonight. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for being here. Let me do your bio, and I will get through everyone here shortly. So Caroline Thompson is a suspense writer with publications in Prism International Dreamers Magazine and Firewords Quarterly. She has an interdisciplinary PhD from New York University and is a professor in the Faculty of Media and Creative Arts at Humber College in Toronto. And I said New York University, but it's York University, excuse me. She's a two-time Pitch Wars mentor and lives in a 112-year-old haunted house. She's here tonight to talk about her new book, Hitman's Daughter. Thanks again for being here.
Thanks.
All right, we're also joined by Sena Desai Gopal. How are you this evening?
Good, how are you?
I'm well, thank you. I'm going to do the same thing. So here's your bio. Sena Desai Gopal is a journalist specializing in science and medicine, food, and travel. Her work has been published in the Boston Globe, The Atlantic, Modern Farmer, and the Times of India, among others. Sena was born in southern India in a small village where her family has lived for 18 generations, a village doomed to submerge as a result of the Upper Krishna Project, and she grew up on stories of its residents and of politics. She now lives in Boston with her husband and two children, and your latest book is The 86th Village, which I'm sure we will hear about in a little bit. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Last but not least of our authors joining tonight, we have Wayne Johnson. How are you this evening?
Great, thank you. It's wonderful to be on.
Oh, yeah, it's wonderful. We love doing these group events with Agora and Polis, so I'm just going to sit back and enjoy. But let me get you introduced, and we'll get Chantelle on here. Wayne Johnson is the multiple Pulitzer Prize-nominated author of the acclaimed Paul Two Persons Mysteries, Don't Think Twice, and Six Crooked Highways, a thriller, The Devil You Know, and many other works of fiction and nonfiction. Of mixed Native and European descent, he grew up in southern Minneapolis and in the North Lakes region of Minnesota on the White Earth and Red Lake reservations. And he's here to talk about his book, The Red Canoe. Now, our group events are nothing without a fabulous moderator. And one of the best out there is Chantelle Osmond. How are you tonight?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having another Agora night. I am so excited. And, honestly, I have authors who are, in so many different places. And of course, with everything going on pandemic wise right now, often the first time I get to meet my authors in person is through you guys. So thank you so much, McKenna.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. We love doing it. And one of the reasons we keep doing it is because you lead such great conversations. So I'm going to leave you to it. As always, if there are technical issues or anything comes up, I'm right here behind the scenes. You can call me back on. Otherwise, I'll be back on in 35 or 40 minutes to do questions. Y'all have fun.
Wonderful. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
All right. So, no pressure there on me to be a good hostess. First of all, welcome to everybody. I'm so glad that we're all in the same room. This is, an amazing group of, fabulous authors, two of whom are debut. And one, as McKenna said, is a, multiple Pulitzer nominee. So we've got that, in our back pocket to ask about. But I think that the first thing that I'd like to ask each of you, particularly our debuts, Wayne, just hold on a second, is what inspired you to actually sit down and write, in each case, this is your debut novel. So Caroline, let's start with you, since you were, in January. We'll go in kind of date order here by publication.
Sure. What inspired me to sort of sit and write the Hitman?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've written before, all of you have written before, but this is in two cases the actual debut novel and not like a short story or an article or something before. So clearly there was an inspiration where it's like, I'm going to sit down and this is my, big first thing.
I think for me, I've always been into Gothic suspense. And I think for the longest time, I didn't even know what it was. Like I write cross genre. And so I knew I loved like sort of spooky stories and mysterious stories, but so I didn't know how to place it. And I just always wanted to write them from a really, really young age. Like I grew up, I never read typical things as a kid. Like I read Stephen King when I was 13 and just sort of grew up on that kind of horror fantasy basis. So I always knew I wanted to write and tell these stories. And I think The Hitman's Daughter had been percolating in me for quite some time. It is based on a shop girl in a rundown grand hotel. And I used to work in a very fancy grand hotel, and I was the shop girl there, and it had this boarded up train line. And when I heard about that, like this was like a decade ago or whatever, I was just like so into that idea, and it just sort of sat there in my head. And so, I'd been writing, and The Hitman's Daughter wasn't my first manuscript and full novel. So it was just, writing one book and then another, and then, trying to get your break and trying to get it published. So that was kind of just came out. All of that percolating stuff from years ago came out into this story.
That's great. And Senna, clearly, as McKenna introduced you, this has the 86 Village, which is your debut novel, has, origins in your own family story and where you grew up.
Right.
So again, what inspired you to actually like sit down? You clearly, you're an international journalist. You do health and science and medicine and all of these other things. And what made you go, I really want to novelize this idea?
Okay, so it began actually, Chantelle, with I was doing science reporting, and I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And it was really hard to like keep the deadlines, and I needed some escape. So I literally started this book as a creative outlet because I needed something. And then it just morphed into something else because simultaneously I started reporting on this village I was born in, which was going to drown in one of the biggest dam projects in India. So it started as nonfiction, but it morphed into fiction. And I just continued, and I did so many versions of it. I didn't know where I was going. I had no idea. I just wrote it. But yeah, it started as an escape, and then it also became like a personal story because I wanted to really understand what was happening in this area where like 175 villages were going to drown. So it just morphed into that. And when I did the research, I realized that I couldn't be objective about it because I was emotionally invested. So I just took all that and turned it into a novel.
No, I think that's really interesting. And I mean, even with Caroline, you had something that happened to you that percolated, and I'm going to go back to this because I want to know how both of these kind of sort of true stories in a weird way ended up being what we'd call like mystery, suspense, horror. But Dwayne, next, clearly you've written other series. Clearly you've written, I think one of your past most recent works was actually about baseball, if I'm not incorrect. And so what brought, I don't know if our listeners are familiar with the Red Canoe, which just came out last month. But it's an Indigenous story about a man who is a boat builder and has this very, shall we say, questionable past, which may or may not be, military and helping people and saving people. And he takes on lost causes. And he's about at the end of his rope himself when a young girl from the reservation wanders into his boat building garage, and they kind of save each other, and also there's a big thriller mystery as well. But so, Wayne, what brought you to Buck after all of these other things that you have written before?
Well, thank you so much. And Senna and Caroline, I really enjoyed hearing what you had to say too. It all just rings true to me. I was living up on the Red Lake Reservation, and some of these issues were just very pressing, the disappearance of women there. And I had the experience of knowing someone that got into trouble. And that was the genesis of the book. And the Carpenter in the book is, in part, he's an amalgam of individuals, but he is based on a friend of mine, and was a boat builder and made these very exclusive boats for people out in Seattle, especially these .com millionaires. And I put these two people together, and that was really what gave the book a kind of velocity. So it's like Senna was saying, when you're connected to people like that and you've seen these things, I'd say witness, really. You've witnessed these things. You really feel compelled to say something. And I did want to research it too, look into it further. I mean, there's the aspect of the Federal Crimes Act, which gets in the way of tribal authorities actually investigating the disappearances of people on the reservation. They have to bring the FBI in. And the FBI is always way behind the curve. They don't know who anybody is. It's almost a lost cause, because by the time they get there and they do what they do, they're a good week behind. And that's, anybody knows that in the disappearance of someone, usually your first 24 hours are critical. So that's,
Well, kind of piggybacking on that and going back immediately to you, Wayne, I think it was really, let me put it this way, as an editor and as somebody who acquired your book, I was really impressed when I saw how authentically one of the two protagonists, we talked about Buck, who is the boat builder, but there is also this young girl who I believe is 15, mostly through the narrative.
right.
And I think it was not only kind of brave of you, but I was really impressed at how authentically you wrote that voice. And was it difficult for you? Did you have to do a lot of research? Like, I don't think it would even come naturally to, me being so far away from that particular,
First of all, that's based on, again, an amalgam of characters, women I really knew, and at that age too. So I drew from that. And if you look into my catalog, my backlist, you'll see that I wrote an entire novel under a pen name, Albertine Strong. And so it's something I've done before. I did it when I was in graduate school too. And I guess I've got three sisters, no brothers, three sisters, and I was a little bit overwhelmed growing up. I was the lone guy in the bunch, and my sisters are really very strong personalities. One of them was CFO of a global company later on, and for example, she spoke 8 languages and lived in 12 countries over 20 years. I mean, she really moved around a lot. But so I draw from that. I mean, and so Lucy in that book is somebody very familiar to me. I had her voice in my head, and I really, it was really a bit of a joy joining her with Buck, because this warrior society friend of mine, he's a character and he's very capable. I thought he'll take care of it.
That's great. No, I love that. And so let's go to Caroline and Senna and talk about your protagonist as well. Tell us a little bit about Maeve, Caroline.
Well, I think Maeve, I think some of the inspiration behind her is also trying to push back against the stereotype of the damsel in distress in the typical Gothic tradition. So I really wanted to do two things. I wanted to challenge myself to write a nice character, because I know that in the past I had gotten critiques of writing typically like unlikable female characters. So I thought I can write a nice character, but at the same time, I wanted to make her strong. So it was this like challenge to make her likable and sort of almost non-violent, and yet have this like incredible skill set to be this amateur sleuth. So she kind of just came together like that, with her father being a hitman and having this, sort of taught skill set to her about investigating things and just being kind of on the ball with being paranoid pretty much about everything. So yeah, she kind of grew from there and developed a little bit organically, I would say.
Well, I think it's one of the things that I love most about your book, and we'll go into the Gothic novel a little bit more later on. But, I've read them and I love them my whole life. And to have a protagonist who, kind of walks that very fine line between both being, feminine and the typical Gothic heroine, and also, being able to, completely debilitate a man with, one, move of her hand is something that I think I always wanted and didn't know I wanted. So I absolutely love that. Now, Sana, you chose to tell your story through kind of different lenses throughout the book. So talk about your protagonists and how that story, because clearly you have that it was your family and it's a village and it's something that has happened to you and that you're well aware of. But why did you choose this lens through like this? Honestly, it's kind of a murder mystery that it happens through, that you tell the story. So how did that come about?
So the main character in my book is actually not a person, it's the village. Because the village exists as a whole. Like, it thinks it's indestructible, it thinks it's invincible. And when I started, I wasn't sure if I could pull it off. But the fact is, when this village goes down, it goes down as a whole. So, and I chose that because it's almost impossible to talk about an entire region, through the lens of like one person. There can't be one person that defines how things will go. So when I picked this character as a village, it just made it more real because it stood out. And if you've read it, there's an entire region that's going to drown, but this village just does not. And so I chose that because it just drove the story forward. And there were all these characters that made the village, and there were all these other characters that were against the village. And it was just easier to tell the story that way rather than pick on one person, because that would be hard to do. If you think about the story I wrote, it'd be hard to concentrate on one person and push the theme forward. Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. But I also think I want you to talk about like Raj and, because even though there's, there's clearly a corruption and environmental aspect to the story that you've talked about, but there's also this love story. And then as it evolves, a mystery that surrounds Raj, who is kind of like the, main, the leader of the village, and the choices that he's made in the past that are coming back to haunt him. So focusing it there, like, how did you choose him and his family and what happens?
So I chose that family because that family had determined a lot of things, including how, the village would react to the government, how it would react to different policies. And that was a family that drove forward. But I also picked Raj because he's so idealistic and he's so moral. And then you have this other side of him that isn't. And I wanted to bring that to the world, is that everything is not like black or white, but there's gray. And Raj basically represented the contradictions in this whole system. He represented the contradictions, and he wasn't perfect. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't imperfect. He was just there, like just any other human being. And I didn't want the readers to judge him or anyone else in the story and decide that, okay, this is a bad person, this is a good person.
No, I think that's a really good description of him, because at the beginning, and of course, I encourage everybody to just read the book, but you see him and he's kind of this, leader of the town and the village, and he basically can do no wrong. And then when this young girl, Reshma, comes into the village just homeless and with nothing and no origins, and you don't know why or who she is or where she came from. And then we learn more and more about Raj's past,
Right.
and the choices that he made that may or may not have been perfect. So
Right.
I really liked watching that. It really did make somebody who you had set up as, on a pedestal,
Right.
a little bit more human, which I really like. And I think, like, again, Caroline, on your, with Maeve, we are used to, at least, most women that I know are used to reading these Gothic things where it's just this, like, perfect fainting woman who, goes through these Gothic things, and, just things happen around her. And you create a situation where she affects things. And just like with Wayne, and there are, Lucy could be a very big victim in this story, and she clearly is not. And so it's something that I really like about all three of these books. I like a lot of things, clearly, about all three of these books. But I think as many similarities as we've discussed so far, I think these are three very different books. We've got Gothic horror, we've got, kind of an environmental mystery / love story, and then we've got, I guess, more straight thriller with very dark themes, and in a good way, dark themes. So these are all very unique worlds, and clearly, like, a hotel that's kind of, I always kind of mentally go, like, it's kind of like the Overlook Hotel, but
Right.
it's a haunted hotel somewhere in Colorado that used to be really, decadent and has fallen into disrepair. And then this village in India, and then, these places near and on the reservation. These are very unique worlds. They're three completely separate things. So did you have in mind anything that you wanted readers to take away after reading your books? Like, with these specific themes, these unique worlds, was it just you wanted to get the story out, or did you have a thing where you're like, this is really what I wanted to say? I know that's probably a terrible question to ask on the fly. Anybody can go.
Well, all of these stories are fascinating to me. And I did want to say, too, I mean, even listening to you address the structure of the three books makes me, I have this sense of joy about reading, because there's so many things to discover, right? And Senna, for example, I mean, originally I wrote this book, The Snake Game, which came out 32 years ago, I think. And exactly the same thing. It was about the principal character was the place and all the people in it, right? So that's interesting. And Caroline, the Gothic, new kind of Gothic, I think is a great idea too. I mean, especially with your protagonist and what her issue is. So the thing I always think is this: what I'm writing is a gift, and what I want more than anything is to people have the experience of actually being in it. And so rather than, I don't like being lectured to. I don't want to lecture to anyone either. I don't really enjoy that. So what I want people to have is an experience of almost immersion. And for some people that might be a little much, because some of this stuff is really tough. But at the same time, I think that's the only way to do it. And I want people to come away loving some of these characters, because they are lovable. I loved them. I mean, I really did. They mean the world to me. They really do. So that's the gift, is trying to give a sense of place, time, happenstance. It's kind of a political, social, historical thing that you're immersed in, because it really is complex. The whole native thing up in northern Minnesota is really complicated. My family's super complicated as a result of it too, since my grandfather on my mother's side was native, and he changed his name and came down to the Twin Cities, and he basically hid out. I mean, we called him the Great White Hunter, even though he was as native as you could be, and that's what he was. He wasn't about to change, right? But I wanted people to get a feel for this, what it really is. So
I think that's a great answer. What about either Senna? Do you have something that you want people to take away from all of this? Because again, these are three like very interesting and very different books. And on the spectrum of, not that none of them are fun, some of them are fun. Caroline's, particularly is more on the fun spectrum, but they kind of get, they deal with deeper issues in a way that I think immerses people,
right.
and so you kind of don't know that you're dealing with that until it's like too late and you've already had to process it. So what do you think the takeaway, if you had one in mind, for your book?
I don't think I had like consciously, a takeaway, but definitely I wanted to explore the whole range of, human emotions from being like really right to really wrong. And also I didn't, even the worst characters in my book, I didn't want them to be judged because it's just what human beings are. I'm not saying that doing something wrong is okay, but just no judgment, because even my main character Rajnak, he's not perfect, but that is what we are like as human beings. And to be honest, I talked a lot to these characters in my head. So I spent a lot of time talking to them. And so that was it. I just didn't want any judgment on anyone or what they do, even the most corrupt people, because this is what the system is. And you can, of course, you have to fight it sometimes, but this is just the way things are.
Agreed. Caroline?
I think similar to both of what my fellow authors have expressed. Like, I didn't go in thinking, okay, I want to write a book about these issues. It was more about, escapism and doing something almost unconsciously. And then, like you said, Chantelle, after you're like, oh, I'm talking about these issues. And I think for me, it has to do with the victimization of women. I think there is a broader sort of commentary on that. If you sort of pull back, there's so much victimization of women in crime fiction and the media and real lived experiences. I mean, all women have that experience of violence against them. So it has to do with that, I think, and giving, I think I write ghost stories, and part of that is giving the voice back to the victim. Like, I've asked myself, I'm like, why am I so fascinated with ghost stories? I mean, apart from the fact that I live in a haunted house, so I have all this inspiration. But I think it has to do with, you might have killed her, but she's coming back, and she's pissed, and, she's got something to say. So it's trying to give that agency back to the victimized woman.
No, and I think that, as disparate as we've discussed that these books are, I think all three of the books do have that as kind of a centralized theme. There's a woman who is fighting back or has tried to fight back or fight against, which isn't necessarily true in this genre a lot. So going to, I guess, a slightly lighter topic, there was I don't know, one of those, questions going around on Twitter the other day that was like, name the books that really made a difference in your life. And like, don't name something that's, award winning. You can't pick, a medal winning, just something that you read and it still is something that inspires you or inspired you to write, whether it's this book or something previously. Let's start with Senna this time, just as a random.
So one book. So there's
you can pick more than one. It's okay.
Yeah. So I think the big inspiration for me was actually nonfiction. It's called Everybody Loves a Good Drought. And it's about all these projects that happened in India over like 60, 70 years that displaced people, created, poverty unimaginable poverty. And it's, by this award-winning author. And I think that could be like, the facts that were presented there formed the basis of my book. So that's one book that I was really, really impressed with. And I think the other one would be, I know not award winning, but Marquez, because when Marquez talks about, writes his books, it's about land that has been snatched away from native populations and used for different things. So I think those would be my two biggest inspirations.
Wonderful answer. Caroline?
So, confession, I was never a good reader, a strong reader growing up. And so my first, and it kind of went into it sideways. Okay. I saw The Phantom of the Opera when I was 12. I know, really cheesy musical and story, but something about that Gothic story stayed with me. And then I picked up the book and became really sort of not obsessed, but maybe low-key obsessed with that story and with that sort of, again, that genre. And I think Dracula, I know we said not award-winning stuff, but Bram Stoker's Dracula, again, was one of my early reads that really, till this day, I love that story and stayed with me. So probably those two were the earliest staples that I can remember that stayed in somewhere in my consciousness. And I didn't know that I loved Gothic fiction. Like, I couldn't name it until very recently.
Well, it's funny because, just as an aside, this is not about me, but I'm going to make it about me for a minute. I did see with one of my early childhood classes, we did a class trip to see Phantom of the Opera. And my takeaway was not like the poster or the T-shirt from, they have that, where they sell the merchandise. I bought the book too. So I completely relate to that. So Wayne?
I have to confess that I was reading all sorts of junky sci-fi when I was a kid. And I had this sister who was a little older than me and very serious. In fact, actually, at one time she said, these books I read later, auf Deutsch, the Heinrich Boll and things like that, I should read them auf Deutsch. I was thinking, I don't really think so. But she gave me a copy of Crime and Punishment when I was 15, and it changed my life because I read that and thought, this is just something of an entirely different order. I was just stunned by it. And it had this profound effect on me because then I just started reading literature of all sorts, which she also fed me. She was already at college, so she was giving me these things when I was just a kid. And of course, another thing that I was really moved by, only because I so related to it and I could understand these things, was Ernest Hemingway's Nick Adams stories, not the later stuff. It was kind of tragic when he became Papa Hemingway. That was a disaster. But prior to that, when he was still working and he was still himself, the Nick Adams stories just were quite wonderful. And I recognized all the settings because they were very much like northern Minnesota. The natives were there. That was really quite wonderful. So, and another thing that I read too that I was really shocked by was Ethan Frome. When I was just a kid, I think one of my grade school teachers read that to us. I think I was only in fifth grade. She read Ethan Frome to us. I was just stunned by that. I just thought that was Edith Wharton. And just fantastic. It was so wonderful. So.
Well, I love all of this. And a couple of points to yours, Wayne. I don't think, I know you said sci-fi junk, but I'm a genre person. So I absolutely think that there are as many valid stories, if not better, being told, in fantasy and sci-fi and Gothic romance and all of these other things. So, I'm not saying that it's better than Dostoevsky, but, I do think that all of these things, give equal credit to probably that background that tells you how to tell engaging story as much as
Sure.
the future literary one that told you how to tell a deep story. Because I think all of those things are really important and really interesting, and I love all of that. And part of the discussion that I had when this Twitter question came up was, I thought back to, just like you said, Wayne, when it was read to me, and it was assigned reading, whether it was earlier or in high school or something. And I thought to myself, if I had not read more widely, than my English teacher in high school
Right.
assigned to me, I would definitely not be doing what I do.
Well,
Like,
isn't it true that, I mean, one of the, I did the whole literary route, but every once in a while it seemed like the professors forgot that it was supposed to be enjoyment, pleasure, a sense of aesthetic um, love of the thing. It's like, it's beautiful. I love it because it's great.
well, absolutely. And so many
Yeah.
of the things that we consider literature or literary now, which there's nothing wrong with, but a lot of them, if you think about like Poe or Dickens or something like that, those were all genre fiction when they were published. So it's
Right,
only,
exactly.
more recently. And so I just love when people give, the love back to, oh, here's where I started at this, silly genre book that shouldn't have meant
Well,
anything.
then
And then
I have to say, because I mean, one author that I was crazy about when I was a kid was Heinlein, Robert Heinlein.
of course.
Absolutely loved him. And he had all those kids' books too, like The Star Beast, Half Spacesuit, Will Travel, um, all those wonderful books. I mean, they were just a joy. Oh, there was one thing called The Star Beast, which was really fun. These two kids get this pet, and they don't realize that it's this creature from somewhere else, and it starts eating things. It can eat metal things, and it gets bigger and bigger. It was too much fun. Till the thing's eating cars and things like that. Oh, and that was called Lumox too. That was its name, Lumox.
Well, I remember, decades ago when I worked in a previous life in Hollywood, and I was lucky enough to be talking to the Bradbury estate, and I got to read a bunch of the short
I
stories.
met Ray Bradbury a few times when I taught at San Francisco State University.
I regret that I
Bradbury
never
fan.
got to meet him, but
God,
I read some of those, and I was just like,
Yeah.
there was so much more depth there than I was anticipating. So
I
I
love
was
that.
one
The
of the
Martian
people falling into
Chronicles.
my trap. Yeah.
Well, that actually influenced the structure of my first book, The Snake Game. It's a cycle of, novelist cycle of stories. And that's what he did with Martian Chronicles and Illustrated Man, both of them, right?
Yeah,
So,
no, they're wonderful. And so recommendations. And that's actually going to be my next question. So Caroline and Senna, like, do you have, and I know you said, not great readers right now, and especially because you're all working on your next books, but is there anything that you've read recently that really affected you? And actually, you know what? I will broaden that, because I think there's so much good, storytelling going on in television and streaming right now too. So if it's a series that you'd rather recommend than a book, go for it. Tell me what you're reading and watching.
Me?
Go for it.
Go ahead.
So, what am I reading? I am reading a lot of like historical fiction, mostly based in India. That's what I'm reading. There's one called Rebel Queen, just because I really enjoy it, and I want to like just go back into what India was before the British. So that's what I'm reading. I'm also reading Sujata Massey's series. I'm reading The Salaryman's Wife, and really enjoying it. So I think those are the two ones that are on my list right now.
Wonderful. Next.
I'm actually reading a lot now. It was before I never read when I was like younger, but now I inhale them. So I just actually started Lucy Foley's The Paris Apartment today. And prior to that, I've recently read S.A. Cosby's Razorblade Tears, was amazing. I loved Parting the Veil by Paulette Kennedy. That's another Gothic that came out recently. Quite a few. I'm trying to think of what else I read. Oh, I just picked up Cackle by Rachel Harrison, which I haven't read yet, but I loved The Return. So I'm really excited to read that next.
I loved Lucy Foley's The Guest List. So I have The Paris Apartment on my list to be read right now. Like when I go through all of the submissions and everything I have to do, it's my fun. So I really hope I hope that one's really great too. I expect it will be.
The Hunting
Wayne?
Party was really good too. If you liked the guest list, she wrote, I think The Hunting Party was before.
Before that, yeah.
And that one's really good too. So if you liked the guest list, you'll probably really like The Hunting Party as well.
Well, I loved it because it was kind of, sorry to get the diversion, but readers, it's kind of a locked room in a kind of gothic way. So the guest list is I think it's an island in Scotland, and everybody goes there for a wedding, and one by one the guests die, and they have these weird connections. So it has, it's very modern, but it also has those callbacks to all of the things that clearly we both love in like gothic suspense and locked room mysteries. So, okay, Wayne, what about you?
I also read Sean Cosby's book Razorblade Tears, and the book prior to that. I thought those were terrific. And have you discovered Attica Locke? She's
wonderful.
She is, yeah, terrific. Bluebird, and then so she's terrific. And there's another writer. His name is Reed Coleman.
He's great.
Yeah, he's great too. I just met him this weekend. So.
Oh, did you at Left Coast?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Him and I were pals. I had the same leather jacket that he used to have. That's a Show Brothers, isn't it? I said, yeah, sure is. And then S.J. Roseanne. She's really, an interesting writer, and so I've been reading a lot of that kind of material. It's been great.
That's wonderful. So we're not quite done yet, but hopefully we're going to be collecting some questions from the audience. But until then, why don't everybody tell me what the next thing coming up for them is, whether it's what they're working on or an event that they want to promote, or anything. This is self-promotion time.
Do I need a soapbox?
Oh, generally that's my job.
Good.
But you can probably tell about, the announcement that's forthcoming.
The announcement that is forthcoming is Chantelle has wonderfully taken on my prequel to The Red Canoe, which is The Witch Tree. And The Witch Tree concerns, again, Buck, and in this case it's decades earlier. And in it, he is trying to save his brother from himself. He's got a very clever brother. Again, these are based on real people. And his brother's got caught up in a staged accident business. And they'll kill him if he just steps out of it. And at the same time, Buck has gotten acquainted with a woman who's really charming, but she has a lot of trouble. She has anxiety attacks, and she's trying to get out of hometown, and actually her parents are trying to institutionalize her because she's so mentally fragile. And you put those two things together, and they basically work out a way of healing and saving themselves and launching out of this miserable situation. So, yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really thrilled. I
was surprised when I got, in my inbox a Buck prequel, and I was like, I don't know what's going to go on here. And somehow he took the Buck story that I loved so much in The Red Canoe and just dialed it up to 11. So I cannot wait for everybody to see this.
Thank you so much.
Of
Really.
course. Caroline, sorry.
What am I? I don't know what I guess I'm still technically promoting The Hitman's Daughter.
Well, you can, and you can also maybe talk about.
I can't wait to read it. Both of these books.
Thanks.
Really.
I mean, there is a sequel.
Yeah, there is book 2. And so I guess I'm excited about. I don't have to guess. I'm excited about that, and yeah, I'm actually working on that and probably edits to that. And then I have some other manuscripts sort of, this is going to sound wild, but a Gothic night at the museum meets the guest list happening as well. And I'm working on that. So yeah.
Okay, I will be knocking on your door tomorrow to get this, please. I need to read it now. I know I'm behind on everything else, but now. And last but by no means least, what's next for you?
Nothing. I do have a second and actually third book in mind, but right now I'm just focused. Since this is my first book, I'm just trying to focus on that and getting it out, especially like internationally and in other places, because I think the 86 Village will do really well in India, for example. It's something that resonates with most of the population. And considering there's like 1.2 billion people, I think quite a few of them will buy it compared to here. So that has been my focus. But I do have a second or third book, because when I started writing 86 Village, it took a completely different path than what I'd intended. So I have research to do, like a couple more, but I'm not ready to jump into it yet.
Understand. And according to McKenna, we have a lot of questions from the audience. So I'm going to stop asking my selfish questions now and see if she will join us and give us some audience questions.
I will be happy to join you. Hi. So we have some questions that are like specific to certain authors. I'm going to start with Wayne. How have you seen the industry change during your career, for better or worse for a writer?
That's somewhat of a difficult question. I mean, I'm aware that, for example, Bertelsmann some time ago bought Random House and consolidated. And so the consolidation has created a kind of narrower market for writers. But at the same time, especially during this COVID period, people are really reading, which is wonderful. And we're seeing another thing that's really wonderful. Actually, it is terrific. I mean, we've got a much broader, more diverse group of authors that are getting into print, and that's wonderful. It really is. It's fantastic to see it. It's exciting. It's new. I think that's just terrific. So that's the really upside of it. We're seeing a greater diversity of news stories from underrepresented groups. I think that's fantastic. I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sana, as your plot is based on a real place in your family's life, what is the actual future for the people who live there?
Well, the future is that they are moving out of where they are, because they just have to. The water is getting closer and closer, especially in the monsoon. The water reaches people's backyard. So most of the village, at least my village, has relocated. But I know that several other villages that are completely submerged or flooded, they relocated like maybe a few years ago. But we are some of the last ones. So the future is to relocate and rehabilitate, sometimes with the help of the government and sometimes not with the help of the government.
Wow. And we have a question for Caroline also, from your bio. We want to hear about your haunted house.
Me too. Let's hear it.
My haunted house, it's funny because most of the stuff that happens, I've been here for about 10 years, and there's a lot of electrical things that are quite curious, we'll say, for those who are skeptical. The thing that really tips it into belief for me is that all of the electrical weirdness that happens is always around 3 a.m. It never happens during daylight hours or waking hours. It's always around 3 a.m. And a very common one that we've had in this house, for instance, is the television turning on at 3 a.m., which is actually how the book starts. So this house does inspire me, and the very prologue of The Hitman's Daughter talks about all of the television sets turning on. So that's something that I have to live with, and I actually unplug my TV always at night. So it does not turn on by itself during the day. And what happens is it'll be like a week. Like if I plug it in for like a certain week, it'll turn on like every night in a row, 3 a.m., around 3 a.m., around 3 a.m. And then like we'll unplug it or whatever. And then it'll like kind of stop. And there's been other things where another really weird one that this one like really freaked us out was the pipes in my basement, again, only at 3 a.m. would do, I'm not kidding you not, we'd wake up to this like incredible banging noise that was so jarring, like that I was like, oh my God, this is like paranormal activity. And it turned out, finally, we were like, what is this? What is this? We figured out it was something to do with the sprinkler system and the pipes jumping at, again, the like witching hour. And we got the technician and they couldn't figure out what it is. So like we, again, unplugged the sprinkler system at that, overnight. And during the day, there's like no problem. So those are just some examples of weird things that happened. And so there's...
I'm going to jump in weirdly on this one because apparently per research and, just being a crime fiction editor, I know this, the time of night that most people die during the night is actually 3 a.m.
Wow.
So like it's like the common time for this to happen. So it's really weird that happens at 3 a.m.
Well, and I should say this is a really old house too. I think it's now 114 years old. So, it's heritage. I know some of the history of its original owners, and yeah, I don't think there's any like evil, demonic spirits, or I would be out of here. With my imagination, I would be gone. But we just sort of live harmoniously. They're around. They float in and out.
All right. So for Sena, is your book being published in English in India or in more than one language immediately?
It's only English. It's English, yes. And Chantelle, is it anywhere else? Just English, right? She should.
Yes. Various publishers have purchased foreign rights for it and will probably come out. But right now, through us at least, it's only, it's available worldwide through us, English. But yeah, hopefully many foreign editions going forward.
So before I do the last question for all the authors, I want to give Chantelle, as always, a chance to talk about what is coming out from Agora that you're excited about in the next couple months. I ask this question every time. Don't be surprised.
I am surprised every time. Well, I'm just going to talk about one because it's coming out in June and our summer is a little bit quiet. But I am really excited. Sebastian de Plata, he's written YA before, but this is his first like adult thriller. And it's called Seeing Strangers. And I would describe it as like a gay fatal attraction. And it's really, really good. So looking forward to that one in June. And otherwise, of course, everything, everybody on the screen.
Sure, of course.
Thank you.
So the question for everyone, and why don't we start with Wayne? So where did it go? There it is. Would you talk about a favorite scene from your book or specific interaction between characters?
Sure. One of my favorite scenes in the book is when the protagonist and, there's actually really two protagonists, Buck and Lucy. And when they finally meet up with the henchmen at the ice caves on the shore of Lake Superior, this real place, and I've been there, and it was really something that had certain cinematic elements to it that I really enjoyed. Plus, it's such a ferocious environment too in the winter to be on Lake Superior in ice caves and in a canoe. I've done it, but so that's it.
How about you, Sena?
So I think one of my favorite scenes, Chantelle, can you hear me? Because I feel like there's an echo here.
Yes.
I can hear you. You're great.
Okay. So one of my favorite scenes is towards the end when the village floods and Raj Nayak goes for a swim and he is swimming through all these streets in the village that he knew, and they're all underwater, and he's just like swimming through the main street and then going to, up to the temple that's outside. So I think that's one of my favorite scenes. It's like really bizarre where this whole village is underwater and he's having like a swimming tour of it.
Okay, and then Caroline, how about you?
I think that one of my favorite scenes is when Maeve, you get to see Maeve with her father. And it was really interesting to develop those scenes for me to try and imagine having, a sociopathic, essentially, father, like her father's a hitman. So I really, it's almost a quieter scene, but when you get to see how she was raised and explore that sort of anti-hero side of her relationship with her father, that was definitely one of my favorites to write. And he's always sort of in her head, and his lessons of survival are always there with her. So those were great to develop.
Excellent. Okay, well, I think that we have had a lovely discussion tonight, and we are all done. As I mentioned, we have a link in the comments if you want to find out more about the authors or their books. And if you're so inclined, we, of course, would appreciate if you want to order books from us. I'm sure the authors would love to sell books as well. Chantelle, thank you for being here, as always. I can't wait for the next one of these. Maybe we'll do one in June with the Gay Fatal Attraction book. Who knows? But we will see you soon on here, I'm sure. So thanks to everyone watching. I'm going to go ahead and log us off for the evening.
Thank you.
Chantelle.
Thanks,
right.
McKenna, for always hosting us and being so fabulous. Thank you.
Yeah,
My
lovely to
pleasure.
meet everyone. Thank you.